My next guest is Mitch Weisburg. He helps people understand why conversations blow up and what actually works to stop that from happening. After decades of work in education, leadership, development, and conflict resolution, he noticed a pattern. Smart, well-intentioned people keep using approaches that make disagreement worse. His work focuses on the brain science behind conflict and practical skills that help people stay calm, ask better questions, and move conversations forward without damaging relationships. Mitch is the creator of the Mind Shifting Framework and the author of Conflict and Collaboration. He brings clear explanations, real life stories, and tools listeners can immediately use at work, at home, and in everyday life. He also has a mission to have a critical mass of people on this plan to be resourceful, resilient, and collaborative. He teaches courses that are on the state website and free to teachers. Welcome to the podcast, Mitch.
Well, Dana, thank you so much for having me on.
Well, we'll start off with a question I ask everyone. Tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Well, I think there's a double part to this,
Hmm.
and I'm going to talk about in my first business where I was teaching people how to use computers from 1981 to
Hmm.
1999, and I had a partner who was kind of foisted on me, who I knew I had to get rid of, and so the first part of it is that I talked to lawyers and they coached me and said, when you fire him, you don't give any reasons. You just tell him that you're sorry. You've
Hmm.
worked together for a long time, and just leave it as that. And no matter how many times he asks you, can I have another chance? You just say, no, no, I'm sorry, the decision's already made, and you don't discuss anything. And that part of it went like, well, it was hard because he's always saying, oh, come on,
Hmm.
Mitch, what's going on? Why didn't you give me a hint about this? And it was like, no, I'm just really sorry. This is not the time to go into it. So that part worked. The part that didn't work was that when we were negotiating about his severance,
Hmm.
and I was determined to be fair. And I told him, we've worked together for 10 years. I really want to be fair. And that negotiation dragged on for 6 months.
Hmm.
The whole time he was earning a salary. He wasn't working, but he was earning a salary. And and I had to pay him a lot of money and pay him for another 6 months. And at the end of it, after he received all the money, he like
Hmm.
puts his arm around my shoulder and he says, Mitch, I'm going to tell you something because I like you. But when you said I want to be fair, he says, I knew I had you because I had no intention of being fair.
Hmm.
My goal was to get the absolute maximum money that I could, and I did that. You way overpaid. So you
Hmm.
have to understand when you're in a conflict with somebody or a negotiation, you have to assess them. And if what their goal is to just win, you
Hmm.
can't be collaborative. You have to stand your ground also.
Hmm.
And that was a huge lesson in negotiation, and it kind of prompted me to then look at different negotiation styles. And this was back in 1993 or 1994, and the
Hmm.
book just came out last year. But that kind of started my journey into looking how people resolve conflicts.
Yeah, and that's a good place to start in terms of how you learned many lessons,
Yep.
also for school leaders. So let's start off with talking about, some of the decisions that school leaders can make sometimes. Um, so either school or district leaders do make these bad decisions sometimes under stress.
Hmm.
And they're in that position because they're smart and capable, but we often see, the results of bad decisions. So describe why this happens often.
Well, because they're dumb,
Hmm.
right? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Um, so I think that we go into situations thinking that there is going to be one right answer.
Yeah.
So that's number one. And number two, when we're in a position of power, we think that we have to show that power. So you
Hmm.
combine those with the fact that, I can't be questioned because I'm the one in power, and there's one right decision, and this is going to be it. And that's what leads to, so many of these decisions that then, you know, the they could have predicted the side effects and what happened and that it wasn't going to work, but they were so focused on, you know, this is the right answer, I'm going to do it,
Hmm.
and it's going to work. And I think one of the things that leaders have to do is to understand that yes, there are times where there's an obvious one right choice, but the vast majority of times where we're making decisions, it's either a complicated situation or it's a complex situation. And both of those are very different from the simple ones where there's one right answer, and they're different from each other. So in a complicated situation, there are solutions where if we did them and everybody was on board, they would work. So if you think about building something or even like picking a curriculum, you pick a reading curriculum. There's probably 6, 8, 15 different reading curriculums. Any of them could work. They all have trade-offs. None of them are perfect,
Hmm.
but they all could eventually teach kids how to read, providing everybody was on board with them. And so, in a complicated situation, it's not a matter of picking the one right solution. It's building consensus as you're making the decision so that when things inevitably don't work right immediately, people are committed to the decision and they're committed to moving forward. So
Hmm.
that's one. And then so many situations are complex. So, anytime we're dealing with people, we can't predict how a person is going to react.
Yeah.
And when we're dealing with lots of people, then then there's a double effect because when we do something, that changes the way people act. And when we change the way people act, that changes the system also. And many of those results can't be predicted. So in a complex system, nobody knows the right answer. And if you think about changing school culture or discipline strategies, those are really complex because just because a kid is late for class doesn't mean that they should or should not be disciplined. There are many factors that go into a kid being late for class. Just because a kid doesn't do well on a test doesn't mean that, oh, we keep the kid back. It could mean that the child needs extra care. It could be that the teacher isn't reaching the child. It could be that the child is having a very difficult home life. So in complex decisions, we don't know what's going to work. And so when a situation is complex, the idea behind making decisions there is that you want to try things so that you can get information and then use that information to try the next thing. And I
Hmm.
think too many times as leaders, we go in and we say, oh, reading scores are down. We're going to change the way all teachers are going to be teaching reading.
Hmm.
Um, I'm going to bring in the PD people and everything's going to work. And like, we don't know that's going to change the way, teachers teach reading. In those cases, it's like, we'll do a tiny experiment, find 3 or 4 teachers, um, work with them on making some probes or some experiments.
Hmm.
Use that information, expand the group of teachers. Use that information, expand the group of teachers again. And very often in these complex situations, we rely on experts, but an expert is a person who knows how to do certain things really, really well.
Hmm. Hmm.
Experts are notorious for not being good at creative thinking, for not being good at innovation, because they know, they're experts,
Hmm.
So, so in situations where it's complex, yes, you need expertise for certain areas, but you can't let the experts be in charge because the experts will always go back to doing it the way that they've always done it. So I
Yeah.
think those are the reason, tends to be the reasons is we don't look at the type of problem. We solve things as if there's one right answer. We should be assessing the problem, and in complex problems, we can't solve the problem. All we can do is try things, and so you want to try things on a smaller basis so that you can get information.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's a good explanation and way of thinking of it. Um, So when these bad decisions happen, there's going to be reactivity. So whether it's from the person in the supervisory position or the person the decisions being done to, what's actually happening in the brain when people become reactive and defensive, especially in a work situation.
And it's not, I would say it's not even just especially in the work situation
Yeah,
because it happens to all of us in our families with,
sure.
it happens at work, it happens with friends. Basically, you know, this is this is an oversimplification of the brain
Yeah.
because the brain is maybe the most complex organism in the universe, right? But um, we look at the brain as basically having two ways of thought. So one way of thought is what people call the survival brain. Neurologists would call that mostly the limbic system. That part of the brain is one of the first parts of the brain to evolve, and the prime purpose is to assess whether the organism is in danger and rapidly do something to get us out of danger. And so, the three most common things that we think of for that survival brain, or the lizard brain, is fight, flight, and freeze. But also, um, it in humans we have a strong desire to do whatever everybody else is doing, so mimicking or copying those around us. And also we tend to revert to the things that we're already fluent in, things that we can do without thinking, so the things that are our habits or our
Hmm.
fluencies. So those are the five different types of actions that that lizard brain or limbic system comes up with, and it does that in less than a second. The limbic brain wakes up to a stimulus in 2/100ths of a second. It assesses, is this at all, could this be, or is this a danger or a risk? If it is, then it takes immediate action and comes up with something along those five lines. But our thinking brains, the prefrontal cortex, or what I call the sage brain, that doesn't wake up until 2 to 3 seconds after a stimulus. And
Hmm.
that's the part of the brain that does critical thinking, creative thinking, empathy with other people, executive function. And if that part of the brain wakes up and the limbic system has already said, we're in danger, we have to do this, then
Hmm.
the limbic system starts flooding that part of the brain with stress hormones, which limit its function so it only focuses on the action that the limbic system has already decided to do. Now, the limbic system doesn't say we're in a lot of danger or we're in a little danger. It's we're in danger or we're not in danger. So if I were to say to you, I don't know, I hate your white background,
Hmm.
okay? Your limbic system, would probably, regard that and say, wait a minute, like this is a threat to me. He's
Hmm.
insulting me.
Hmm.
Um, and then at that point, you lose the ability to then say, well, wait a minute, something, it's just a plain white background. It doesn't really make any difference what his opinion is.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and maybe he's 10% right. Maybe I could have a better back. Whatever it is that your creative juices would be if you were thinking about this from your prefrontal cortex. You don't have
Hmm.
access to that. The prefrontal cortex is like has been controlled by the limbic system to say, this person just threatened me. What can I say to get back at him?
Yeah.
Okay. Or this person threatened me, but this person is in a position of power. And so I can't do anything back. How can I hide or how can I run away?
Hmm.
And so that's what happens um, when let's say an administrator, comes up with a policy for the school and a teacher is used to doing something a certain way and their limbic brain kicks in and says, wait a minute, this person is criticizing what I've always done. What can I do to protect myself? And it's like, well, something, maybe I can close my door and teach the old way. Maybe I can just pretend that I'm going through the motions, but teach my old way.
Yeah.
Maybe I can slow, just the reactive methods instead of saying, well, wait a minute, this person, the administrator came up with this policy. Nothing is all bad or all good. So,
Hmm.
maybe, yeah, a different frame would be, let's say it's 90% bad. What's the 10% of it that's good? Um, we don't have access to those capabilities when we're in fight, flight, freeze, or when we're in limbic mode.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. In terms of how people can, um, think more rationally when they're not in
Right.
that fight, flight, or
Hmm.
freeze. So when there is conflict, whether it's between leaders and staff, or leaders amongst themselves, or even educators in their classroom, how can educators de-escalate the conflict without giving up authority?
Well, we go through really three aspects of that in the book.
Okay.
So one aspect is you look for ways to give positive feedback.
Hmm.
So through positive feedback, you're establishing connection, and positive feedback could be by complimenting a strength that the other person has, but something that makes the person kind of relax, and so it doesn't you don't feel they don't feel like the person is attacking. And then there's a way of questioning called motivational interviewing, which
Okay.
you can learn in the book, or you could. There are plenty of people who coach in motivational interviewing, or you can learn on the internet. But it's a way of questioning and getting out the information that allows you to move forward. And very often, it's a way of letting the other person convince themselves of what they should be doing.
Hmm.
Okay. If you're using motivational interviewing and it's coming across that you're only asking the questions in order for the person to do what you wanted them to do in the first place, then it's not going to work. The person has to have the feeling that you are questioning them because you are curious and you're interested in them. So
Hmm.
motivational interviewing is the second part of it. And then the third part of it is when you come to the point where you're making the determination of what the person could do, is we use a technique called nonviolent communications, which again
Hmm.
you could look up, but or it's in a conflict and collaboration book also. But in nonviolent communication, it's a way of making your requests in a way that is much less likely to stir the other person to react in fight, flight, or freeze.
Hmm.
And there's a way of phrasing um, your the re phrasing what happened, how you're feeling, in general, what the need is, and then finally the specific request. And it's generally best if you can phrase that final request as a question rather than as a statement.
Hmm. Hmm. So burnout is a motivational problem. But we often think it's a motivational problem, um, and or a willpower issue. But why is it not a motivational problem or a willpower issue?
Well, so motivation is something that is internal, and when a person is coming from a place of well-being, then they will find the things to motivate. And so it's not a matter of willpower. It's a matter of for each person, or if you're coaching or managing a person, to
Hmm.
help them align what they're doing with what they most value. And actually, motivational interviewing is a way of questioning to make sure that that happens. But um, it's not like rah rah rah, or we'll give you more pay, or here's some motivational posters. It's really allowing people to work in and operate in ways that most align with the things that are most important to them. And
Hmm.
when they do that, the idea of motivation goes away because if consider that you have to take out the trash, and like I have to take out the trash means that it's a chore, but I get to keep my house clean
Hmm.
changes the whole attitude. It's like, oh, I'm keeping the house exactly the way I want to live,
Hmm.
and taking out the trash is just a small part of it, and it's like you're linking it to something that you really love, and so it's no longer a matter of uh, you know, girding yourself or forcing yourself with a grit, that takes a lot of energy in order to do that. It's really when everything is aligned, you're in a state of ease and flow, and it's getting into that state of ease and flow that really brings out the long-term motivation in people.
Mm-hmm. Well, when we think about educators leaving the profession, maybe not being motivated to stay in schools anymore, how, a lot of the time when people leave, maybe it's because of the negative stimuli around them.
Yep.
So how does motivation and willpower play a part there?
Well, I think it has to happen before the person is fully burned out. Because once the
Okay.
person is fully burned out, their brain is basically in trauma. And when your brain is in trauma, the smallest negative, it may not even be negative, but the smallest thing will trigger them.
Hmm.
And in those cases, the brain needs time to repair. Maybe the person can do it through rest. Maybe the person needs somebody to help them through that. But before they get to the point where they're traumatized, it's a matter, you know, well, I guess if the environment is a really toxic environment, then frankly the person needs to get out of the environment because we pick up the energy from the people around us. And if you're in a toxic environment, then a bad system will defeat a good person virtually every single time. But most of the environments aren't completely toxic. There's things that we don't like to do. There's aspects that really should be changed, but there's generally things that we can enjoy and things that we don't. And so one of the things is to learn as an individual or a leader helping their people learn how to do this, how to um, consciously focus your brain on the good aspects of what you're doing.
Hmm.
And uh, and you start off doing that through learning how to either meditate or to do mindfulness. And then once you learn how to consciously direct your attention through things like mindfulness or breathing exercises, then you learn how to do it in all aspects of your life. So you learn how to, something I really don't like this, but maybe that's just a limbic reaction. Let me let me calm myself down and
Hmm.
now let me focus on what I really want. And teachers also can learn how to do that for their kids. And so, with the course, most of the courses that I teach are with teachers. So the teachers find that when their kids are triggered, when their kids are dysregulated, um, in a relatively short amount of time, they can teach the kid how to be co-regulated, and in a little bit longer amount of time, they can teach the kid with maybe just a word or two, like, "Oh, wait, are you in your limbic mind? How do you get out of it?" And the kid will know what to do.
Hmm. Hmm. So often, when people at work have difficult conversations, sometimes these conversations tend to spiral, despite making, good intentions. For example, even when you're talking about a student or maybe having a conversation with a teacher and a parent having a conversation, you tend to focus on the negative. So those things spiral. So how can we avoid the spiraling?
So the best way of avoiding the spiraling is to prepare for the conversation in advance.
Hmm.
Because if you're not prepared for the conversation in advance, if you know the tools of redirecting your consciousness, calming yourself down, and responding rather than reacting, a lot of the time you can do that,
Hmm.
but you're still going to be triggered in the moment because you don't have time to really think. If you know you're going to be having a difficult conversation with somebody, um, to you, you can map out the things that might happen in that conversation that are negative and how you want to react to them, how you want to be. I want to be, if this person says something to me, I want to come back with an empathetic statement 5 times.
Hmm.
I also find that it's very valuable to write out the type of interaction that I'm going to have with another person in AI. And
Mhm.
then I say to the AI, use motivational interviewing in order to make sure that this, how could I use motivational interviewing? Could you map out a conversation for me where the person is would say things that would normally trigger me, and I come back through empathy and exploration, and it's not going to be perfect, and you're never going to
Mhm.
use exactly what it does, what it writes, but it's going to give you some hints at how to rephrase things
Mhm.
that you never would have come up with on your own.
Mhm.
So you can't like pull it out and say, okay, I'm going to say this and they're going to say that, but it's going to tell you, well, that they're, it'll pretend that it's definite, but it'll give you some of the things that they are likely to say and ways of coming back with those things that are non-confrontational.
Mhm. Mhm. So maybe if a teacher is talking with a student who is not coming to class and then they start coming to class, how would a teacher maybe approach this with empathy and finding a positive trait in the student rather than reacting negatively?
Well, so the first thing is that the teacher needs to be able to be in a state of calmness themselves. So if
Hmm.
they're in a state where they're thinking this student is always late and they're annoying me, then they're not, maybe they could do something that will have a positive effect in the short term, but they're not going to be able to have a long-term effect on the child because they themselves are in a triggered state. So the first thing
Hmm.
is that they have to go through the work to get themselves into an empathetic manner. And then, um, and then phrasing questions to the student that uh, gives the student agency and indicates to the student that you're curious about them rather than merely trying to manipulate them to do what you want them to do. And again, those, motivational interviewing has been shown by social scientists to be like 5 times more effective for doing that than any other way of talking to people in situations like that. So it's questions like, well, what would you like to happen?
Hmm.
Um, how do you think you might be able to come to class on time? Let's see if we can come up with 3 possible ways. Which way feels best to you? Questions like that, rather than, look, you're always late. It's if you continue to be late, you're going to flunk this course, which means you're going to stay back, or you're going to get detention, or you're going to be expelled, or um, those might work once, but they only they tend to only work in the very short term.
Hmm. Yeah, so it's a
Did
good
that,
way
did that
of
answer?
thinking.
Yeah, did
Yeah,
that answer
no.
your question? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So we've had a great conversation today around just a couple of things about how the brain reacts when under stress, why smart people make poor decisions, and also how conversations can spiral. If people want to know more about you and find your book and find you on social media, where can people find you?
Well, my website is mindshiftingwithmitch.com. So they can always find information about the books. There'll be a button they can sign up for the free newsletter on Mindshifting, which generally talks about education, um, but sometimes talks about family or other work issues also. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so they can find me on LinkedIn. Um, I think mindshiftingwithmitch.com is probably the best way. If you're in New York State, then you can go to the Frontline portal and sign up for the courses free. If you're in Washington State, you can go to PD Enroller and sign up for the courses free. If you're an administrator in another state, I would love to be able to offer these classes to free to other teachers in other states. I just haven't been able to get in yet.
Okay, okay. And then you also have a Substack as well. People should
Yes,
sign
yep,
up
yep. Mitch
for.
Weisburg on Substack as well. Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
So we out of everything we've talked about in terms of mind shift and how to reframe conversations and look for the positive, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
Well, I think self-awareness is the key first step. So
Mhm.
when you when you're talking with somebody or when you're doing something and you feel that it's not going well, is to be able to ask yourself, am I possibly in limbic brain rather than in sage brain?
Mhm.
And I would say half the time when you just the self-awareness by itself is going to move you over to sage brain. It's like, oh, I don't have to think that way.
Mhm.
Sometimes you're going to have to distract your attention, like maybe take, if you can, take a 2 minute break and do some mindfulness or go for a walk or listen to some music or something. Sometimes positive self-talk will help get you out. But I would say the one thing is the self-awareness, and to when you find things aren't going well, say, could I be in limbic mode right now? How could I get into sage mode? That would be the
Mhm.
one thing.
Mhm. How easy is it for somebody to actually get out of that Olympic brain though when they're in the middle of it?
It's wrong for me to say it's a muscle, but it
Mhm.
isn't that different. Um,
Mhm.
the first time you do it, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't. The first time I did it, I was in a traffic jam, and I was
Mhm.
getting more and more upset. And it's like, well, wait a minute, that's in my head. Could I be happy here? And it was
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, it worked. So, so you'll start off being able to do it in simple things like that. But the more you do it, the more times and the more difficult times it'll work. But it's a lifelong practice because there will be times where somebody will trigger me, and I'll go through all the things that I've learned in 20 years to be able to get out of it, and I won't be able to get out of it, and I'll have to call my wife unless she's the one who's triggering it, or one of my kids who's an adult, and just say I'm just I can't get out of limbic, and they're
Mhm.
like, Daddy, I'm just going to go to one of your books and let's go through this, and they walk me
Mhm.
through it. And just having a trusted advisor is or a trusted coach that you sometimes you coach them and they coach you is another way of doing it.
Mhm. 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 That's great advice. Well, thank you so much for being on the Out of the Trenches podcast today. People can go to your website to learn a lot more and pick up your book on any place where they can find books online. And it's been great learning more about the Olympic system and really about how one can shift their mind
Right.
around conflict and then collaborate better. Thank you so much.
Well, Dana, thank you for having me, on Out of the Trenches, and look forward to listening to your episodes because they're always really interesting.